We've got about 20 minutes to have an engaging discussion with our panel members. You've met some of them already, Dr. Catriona Wallace earlier this morning, Andrew Stevens and Gary Hogan, who is going to answer questions if needed from the floor. But you may not have met Alison, the National Chairperson from KPMG, Geraldine McKenzie-McHarg, Professional Development Manager from Toyota Australia, and Rachael Moore, Senior Systems Project Manager at Cochlear. So what we'd like to do in this session is thinking about the framework of the Decadal Plan for Women in STEM, ask some questions to our panellists, and do feel free to pop up your hand. I'd like to make this one as dynamic and engaging as possible, particularly, we'll get the questions started and then I'll come over to the over there, particularly since we haven't had as much networking as we would have liked. I have a first question I'd like to ask Andrew, and that goes to organisational leadership and things that are done to support both men and women. Can you give me some very practical examples of where CEOs, particularly male CEOs, have provided that sort of support and accountability in a very practical sense?
Certainly. A couple of examples. The first one that I think is important is consistent with accountability for progress is to establish targets for female rep, and this is controversial. Some people don't like this, other people don't think it goes hard enough.
You're talking quotas?
No, targets for improvement. So that, and a requirement on leaders, male and female, at all levels to demonstrate progress in terms of female representation. Because I don't know if those of you who were in Alison's discussion a few minutes ago will hear about the implication of getting to a tipping point when it's easier to be a woman because the way in which you are included becomes more natural in the environment. And so that was one. I think the other one is the way in which you conduct meetings as a leader is important, because to make sure that you aren't the one that is leading to the diminishing of the voices, and making sure that everybody's included, that the women aren't the ones who are taking the plastic off the sandwiches or getting the water or taking the notes, and the men are the ones with the pens doing all the exciting stuff on the whiteboard. It's important that the way in which you conduct those. But having someone who's taken a panel pledge to only talk on panels that have a gender balance, and I'm overachieving at the moment, is to have the same rule apply inside, so that women's voices are viewed as voices of authority in the organisation, and all of those things that you think of all of them. They don't actually sound that hard. Well, they are actually that hard if you're not of that makeup, and you're not asking yourself that question at the first, which is, could it be that I'm the problem? And I think that conscious thing, consciously including women in everything you do, is the key. Otherwise, the system will subconsciously exclude women. That's the problem. Thank you.
I'd like to touch on resilience, and it's come up in Catriona's talk. I've heard Alison speak about it as well. You do need resilience. You do need to get back up and try and work through some of the barriers and some of the discrimination and biases that are faced. But we also know that, it's documented that there is a confidence gap. That women in academia, for example, will hold off publishing their research until they've doubly proven that it's right, and will probably publish in higher ranking journals, whereas a male counterpart would publish a larger number in a lower ranking journal. What's your advice on, particularly to younger women, on overcoming what's often described as the confidence gap? Any of the panellists could answer, but it was a reflection on some of your
look, I'll go first. I guess when somebody asked Catriona earlier when she said, you've got to not give a shit, and somebody said, what was the tipping point? I actually had a tipping point, I guess. I had a terrible disappointment at work, and had a mentor help me get over it, and I came into work every day and I thought I was walking into work and everyone was looking at me and saying, she's a failure. And that's how I felt, and it was terrified to come into work, and we'd lost a big client, and so I had to reinvent myself and make myself busy, and that's how I thought about it. I was really nervous. And I had a mentor, and on the third session, the first two sessions, I just cried in his office. And then at the end of the second session, he said, I'm a really good listener and you've had a terrible time and the team didn't support you. But when you're ready to do something about it, I'm good at listening. If we want to keep doing this, it's fine. But when you're ready to do something about it, I'm ready for that too. So I thought that was a good message. I came with my makeup on next time, so I'm not going to cry. I'm ready for a conversation. But the light bulb moment for me, which has helped me time and again when I want to be resilient, was he said to me, "Why do you think anyone's looking at you? You know, honestly, everyone out there's dealing with shit, trying to frantically doing the duck thing, pedaling under the water, trying to pretend it's all under control. Nobody's noticed you. Get over yourself. How big is your ego that everyone's looking at you?" And so I actually thought, that's a big ego, actually. And it was really interesting. I sort of went out and sort of started reflecting on some of the things I was talking to people about. They were all trying to hide that they were only just in control and things. And that was a real light bulb moment for me. If you fail, occasionally people will have a go at you. And Catriona had some, horrible examples of people wanting to snipe. And that's okay. They're probably not people that you value their opinions anyway. But for the most part, people aren't even bothering to notice you. And they'll, as many of them will admire you for getting up and going again. So that was probably my biggest single thing that helped me want to go again. And the other thing I would say is it really helps you, I think, if you make it not about yourself. So the other thing for me when I went into the chairman role, which was an election where the 80% men partners had to decide who they wanted, and I was against 4 men, and I was like, do I really want to do this? And the thing that made me do it was right when Donald Trump got elected. And I just actually thought, if women who are in positions of leadership here step back, we are going backwards miles, guys. So those that are in positions of power need to step up. And as soon as it wasn't about me, it was like, I actually need to do this because it matters for women that women step up. It became much easier then to be resilient because I wasn't doing it for myself. And so I think, again, for a lot of you, if you're really cringing about your own self, if you can, in your minds, also think about what you're achieving for other people. And a bit to Catriona's point, we all want to help other people succeed behind us and help each other and those things. That's the other really big resilience point for me, that it's not about me now. So I don't matter so much anymore, but it really, really matters to me that there are women leaders and that there are visible women leaders. And so if I'm in this position, I'd better not get off the pedestal. I'd better step up and do it as well as I can. So they're probably my 2 things.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Could I build on top? So one of the... You're gonna like this one. Okay, so one of the best bits of advice I was ever given is in Silicon Valley, so in San Francisco. And there was a very successful entrepreneur there. And he said, Catriona, this is what the best advice that I'll ever give you. And he said, you need to realise that everything is fucked up all the time. And your role as the leader is to unfuck it one bit at a time. And I went, oh, that's good. And that's building on Alison's point that actually we think there's other senior people and you get to a board level, you get to executive level, and when we arrive there we go, oh, you guys also don't know what's really going on, do you? Okay, I get it. So I took, instead of being like a startup founder going, oh, everything is broken all the time, everything's on fire, I'm always feeling bad about myself, I'm not confident. Mine was to flip the whole thing around and go, oh yeah, everything is on fire, it's meant to be on fire all the time, and I just need to fix one bit at a time. And the only way I can do that is to have a learning mindset. So if I, instead of just being hard on myself all the time and not confident, just went, the only thing that I actually know is real and true is that I'm going to learn. It changed my whole way of thinking and built my confidence because it's all about learning. That's all that is guaranteed.
Excellent, thank you.
If I can pick up on that as well, you've both talked in your stories about getting advice or talking to mentors. I think it's a lot easier to be resilient if you know that somebody has your back. And I know we're always told to seek out mentors, but really it's so important to surround yourself with people that can help you reframe situations like that.
Agreed.
And make you realise that it's not all about you.
It was once said, conduct yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white male. So when you look at that job advert and say, oh, I only fulfil 60 of the selection criteria, apply. Because the mediocre white male would have not even asked that question. Thank you. I'm going to ask about quotas. So targets, there is an important distinction. Is there ever a circumstance where we need to use quotas? Does it get dire enough where all of the solutions and tools we can possibly throw at something just doesn't cut it.
What about the concept, I think it's come up a few times today, quotas, targets? I think there's an important distinction. But for example, if you're on a hiring panel, you must have representation on the hiring panel, and you must have representation in the talent pool. I think it's about minimums that are needed to effect a change, rather than artificially inflating the number of people doing a certain thing.
So encourage fair participation, equal participation, and then have the competition. Anyone want to add to that?
I think targets are incredibly important, and but they're not the only solution. They're just part of it. So if we have targets, it says we think this is important and we need to focus on it and do things actively to reduce them. In my industry, we have safety targets, and no one questions that it's important to save people from hurting themselves. I don't see this as any sort of difference. But like I say, they're one lever, and they shouldn't be the main lever. The important part is that what really determines whether someone's going to succeed, particularly into leadership roles, is the exposure they have to doing and applying and failing early on in their career. So it's at that point that we need to make sure that females are getting the same opportunities as their male colleagues. And then the other part of it is that the females have a responsibility too, not to rely on a target system, but to genuinely prove that they can do and compete as well as their male equivalent. So I think it's part of a big strategy.
Segueing from that, I have this kind of utopia, this, unrealistic dream, I think, that within a couple of generations this is going to be sorted, because, the younger people coming through the system will have benefited from these conversations. And the reality is there's nothing in our history that has shown us that this is actually likely to happen. And I was particularly disturbed by a report I read recently where what we're starting to see is a quantified backlash from younger boys who are coming into a system and saying, well, she's going to get that job, or she's going to, of course, because she's a woman, and all of the rules have changed now, and there's all this focus on gender equity, and there's so much focus on it that there is significant and quantified backlash. I think this is a real issue, because moving forward and taking everybody with us is very, very important, including those younger men. Do you have any comments or observations on that in terms of how we might go forward in a sustainable way and bringing everyone with us?
If I could answer that, I think diversity is about everybody, and it's good for everybody. If I take the Cochlear example, there's been a lot of internal publicity about our flexible work programme and how it's not just about mums coming back from maternity leave. And through that, there's actually been a 25% uptake. It's not just people like me with little kids that want to spend more time with their kids. There's lots of people that don't have families that would just prefer to work a 4-day week. And it's really about, I think, explaining the benefits of diversity and flexibility in a better workplace and how it benefits everybody, not just the women.
Thank you.
I've got a few thoughts on this. So one of my sons, Hunter Johnson, runs a program called the Man Cave, based here in Melbourne. Has anyone heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Hunter works with teenage boys, young men, in redefining masculinity, so helping them come to a healthy understanding of masculinity. And there's various programs now around this type of movement. And we can also see the Jordan Peterson effect, where Jordan Peterson, in speaking about to young men, has really represented the voice, whether you agree with what he says or not. But he really speaks to this fact that we're now sort of dislocating young men where they don't really know their position now that they see women are gaining power. So I think we're at a very interesting time here where there is a lot of uncertainty, and young men, I believe, are not just young men, probably
even old guys like me,
even
Krusty's dinosaurs,
kind of youngish men, are unsure of how they behave or what they're to do. And again, do we as women have a responsibility to help them through that? probably. I think yes. But also men, and I know Hunter's view and the Man Cave's view is kind of men have created this situation, men need to be the ones fixing it, but they need the women's support. I'd love to hear your view.
I spent most of when I did real work, rather than being a non-exec director, I was a consultant, and I was largely a change management consultant. And this crusty old English consultant that we work with said that if you're not taking the hit, in change management terms, if you're not taking the hits, you're not over the target. And resistance is...
Was that me?
No, that wasn't you, because you're not crusty.
No, but what does that, if you're not taking the hits?
No, but if people aren't resisting you, there's no change happening. Okay. Is that too hard?
No,
that's not too hard.
Good.
No, if you're not taking the hits, you're not over the top of the target. So it's an Air Force type of analogy. That you're flying over and you're over the target and you're starting to take hits. Means you are right at the point where change is happening. And I think that's how I was getting encouraged by resistance, because it says something's changing. So there's clearly a movement there that at the societal level that people will speak up. And I tell you a challenging thing I had. My niece, who was in year 9, contacted me and said, look, I've got to do a project and I've got to talk about parental leave and flexible work and why businesses are doing that. And I had a heck of a dilemma. I'm thinking, gee, do I really tell her why we have to do that? Or do I gloss over it and say it's a nice way of us working? And so I decided I'd go all in. And I just thought, isn't it terrible that I've got to explain to someone who's 15 the problems she's going to have throughout a large part of her working life? I just felt completely conflicted by that. And so I just said, that's the way it is, but here's what's happening. But there is also a level of resistance amongst young women who feel like I'm only making it because of BOD, because of diversity. Right? I didn't really earn this. Right? So there's that one as well. I think the point is we've got to keep explaining to people the realities, because this is about equalising the system. It's not about giving one an advantage over the other, which is the status quo today, actually. It's equalising. But we should be encouraged by resistance, and we should try and surface resistance, because when people will tell you, it's not false consensus, when they tell you that, actually, I've got a problem with this. I've got a problem with it. And I'm worried that men who have valid credentials will not be selected for the job because of diversity. The answer is, well, let's actually sit down and talk about them. Because there is a redefinition happening. Thank goodness.
Thank you. I am going to take a few questions, but then come back to the panellists for one take-home message to finish off. So start thinking about your take-home message, and I'll take 3 questions from the audience. The first hand up earlier was here. Hi, the microphone's coming. Sorry.
Elizabeth Grigg from Texture Architects. A lot of the discussion today has been young women and older women who have already chosen their career, chosen the subjects they're taking. I'm really interested in increasing the 16% who are in STEM. It sort of assumes that 50% have done STEM subjects, but only 16 are then working in the field, when in fact they're not taking those subjects. And I think that critical mass is also the answer to so much of what we're talking about. It doesn't become diversity, really, if you're talking about 50%, 50%. So I think that I would just like to hear from anyone on the panel who would have some views about how we take what we have understanding about all of the issues that people suffer in the workplace. So they suffer as young girls growing up, and how we change that so that STEM, maths, science and all those sorts of things are embraced by a greater proportion of women.
Does anyone want to take that?
I'm happy to have a go. I don't want to dominate the conversation. That thing about redefining STEM around purpose is exactly to get at this point. So it's an Oricon story, and Guillaume Swigers told us the story that out of the blue, he received, when he was the CEO of Oricon worldwide, he received an email from this woman who worked for Oricon and said, listen, I've just been awarded this incredible engineering award in Africa, and Guillaume's thinking, who is this person? I've never heard of this person. She was 26. And the way she explained what she did was that I'm solving the drinkable water problem for large parts of Africa. Right? Now, if you are, or I'm saving the koalas. People say, you know what? I want to do that. I want to save the koalas, or I want to solve the drinking water problem for Africa. And then if you say, well, actually, that sounds a lot more interesting than, you know what, you should really study STEM.
Yeah.
And that's what Redefine STEM is about, is to say, let's talk about the purpose of it, because who doesn't want to solve the world's greatest problems? Who doesn't want to do that? Everybody wants to do that. And whether it's you do cochlear implants, or you develop great automotive vehicles, or you do AI, all of these things are solving incredible problems that the world has, but turning those problems into amazing opportunities, which is the reality for us in Australia, is how do we turn 25 million people, which seems to be automatically at a disadvantage from big countries, to be an advantage, because we get it earlier and we move faster. That's the key, I think. But redefine it, I think, around purpose is exactly what we're talking about.
And that starts in the education system,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
in families, around the kitchen table.
absolutely, and perceptions that physics, maths, chemistry, too hard, it's analytical, it's just for boys. Absolutely not. That is reinforced in so many curriculum resources, unfortunately. There almost needs to be a rewrite, or at least a review of many of them. And teachers given the opportunity to have, to be exposed to the diverse careers that STEM leads to, so as to redefine them with purpose. Whatever my son tells me he wants to be, I tell him he needs science to get there. But he doesn't tell me, doesn't matter the question, science is the answer. But when you think about his articulation of that at 5, it's not I want to do science, it's Mum, I want to be a zookeeper, I want to be, you know, it's the purpose, and it starts then, somehow we knock it out. One more from the audience. Oh.
Alex, there she is. Alex, it's you.
Hi everyone, Alex Kingsbury from RMIT. Just this week, UTS announced that they were going to lower the entrance requirements for females going into engineering by 10 percentage points. Is this a good thing for female participation in engineering, or is it a bad thing?
Yeah, it's been very controversial.
It has.
I'm not a STEM person, I'm staying out of this one.
I'm actually going to say yes.
I agree with that too.
Yeah, I was going to say yes.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Because I think the entry level, when you come, so from my own experience, coming in to engineering, I had no concept of what engineering was, and I don't think I really got that until I left engineering. And if you look at the traditional skill sets, I'm chemical engineering background, which is all out of oil and gas refining. Now, I can tell you now, if I built a distillation column, you should all run. But what engineering has taught me is, and we're talking about purpose and talking about problem solving, is a methodology of looking at problems. And those problems could be anything. I've worked in equipment. I'm now dealing with helping people to solve their own problems by training them through thinking. Toyota production systems, where we're working with the city morgue to improve their processes. So there is a female perspective that is brought, and it's not always the technical academic that is, there's a very small percentage of those engineers end up in those roles. So,
yeah, I think it needs to be pitched very carefully when we have a situation like that. It's about widening the pool. It's not about artificially bringing in dumber women, because we need more women. It's about getting a bigger funnel of people coming into a course. They're not just assessed on their marks.
Yeah.
But Alison, I'm interested in your view.
Alex, what do you think? By the way, everything I know about additive manufacturing, Alex taught me. When Alex was at the CSIRO and was the director of Lab 22, which is the additive manufacturing and titanium part of CSIRO. She's very amazing.
Thank you, Andrew. So, I mean, I'll say first, I think, so there's a comment made around when will we achieve, what are the timelines? So the current rate of change, we're not going anywhere anytime fast. And a point should be made that to really make a difference, you have to do something quite dramatic. And it's not about incremental change, it's got to be about step change, and doing something that requires something to be done that's quite radical. And I think that lowering the entrance requirements by 10 percentage points for engineering is pretty radical. However, I think it stinks. I don't like it. And I think that the issue is that it's almost like it's inferring. Our issue with getting women into engineering is because they're not getting the high enough marks, which is not the problem. In fact, when you look at graduates that come out of Year 12, it is actually young girls or young women who are doing better than the boys, and that's becoming probably more of an issue, I think, is that you get these very, very high achieving girls, and actually we have an issue with the boys, as was touched upon earlier. So there's plenty of young women getting very high entrance scores. They're just not choosing engineering. So why are we saying we're going to lower the entrance requirement for those women if the entrance requirement is not the hindering, that's not the barrier?
That's a good point.
We're going to have to leave it there. One line take-home message from each person.
You're starting with me. Look, I think the other thing that I reflect on that's served me well in my career is I don't do regret. So whenever people say to me, what would you have done differently? What do you regret? I say, I don't do that. I learned when I stuff something up, which I do most days, I can apologise for it. I can learn from it. I can not do it again, but I can't undo what I've done. So I don't waste time, and I used to be a great get up at 2 in the morning and beat myself up every night over why did I say that, why didn't I do this, and now and it took me a while to learn it. It's completely learned behaviour now. I don't do regret. I don't look backwards. I learn. I don't repeat my mistakes, and I move forwards, and that's really helped me to keep positive, growing, learning, and also not drowning in guilt. So that's been probably a big thing for me.
Rachael.
I think what I would like to say is I know we're all frustrated by the pace of change in this matter, but I do see an enormous generational change at the moment. I'm 20 years into my career, and I see a new generation of people coming in that are more flexible, more collaborative. I see companies reflecting that. I see it becoming much more important to talk about diversity and inclusion in my business. And I do think that the pace of change is very much picking up. There's a groundswell of change happening, so don't lose hope.
Andrew?
Don't just be committed, do something. Take personal responsibility for make a difference every single day. Because I've seen so many men who've said, I'm really committed to gender equality, and nothing ever happens around them. So you want to demonstrate by your level of commitment by the action that you take, because there's a national priority riding on it.
Catriona?
Mine is for women to be bold. Just be courageous and just be bold. Just really be badasses.
It's a hard one to follow.
I want to be a badass.
I'll share some advice that after a big stuff up at work, one of my managers shared with me, and I was, beating myself up about it, and he said, at Toyota, we don't care if you fall off the horse, but we do care if you don't get back on.
Nice.
Thank you. Please put your hands together for our wonderful panel.